Thought I'd do today's video on fructose because we've all heard so much about it, whether it's from the news or health experts, telling us to avoid fructose. But then what about fruit? Is the fructose in fruit good? We've all kind of heard that, or I've heard that parroted that, hey, fruit sugar is good sugar. I've also heard people say, don't eat a lot of fruit because it's got a lot of sugar in it. So let's cover fructose. And this was also spurred because I had a good question from someone that I'm working with. And that is, so I always recommend carbs being eaten with something. So you never want naked carbs. You always want some protein and fat in your meals. So we don't want to just have a carbohydrate only meal. But the question was, hey, what about fruit? Is fruit okay to eat as a naked carb? And my answer was, you might as well pair, some nuts or something with it, but it's not going to be nearly as bad as like a different carbohydrate type of meal, because fruit is particularly special in that it's made up, the sugar in fruit is made up of a high amount of fructose, and B, it has fiber in it. Most fruit has a decent amount of fiber, so that's going to slow the absorption of sugar into our bloodstream, into our body even more. But back to fructose. So fructose gets a bad rep because of high fructose corn syrup, but fructose itself actually doesn't really raise blood sugar levels. So it's processed a lot differently than glucose or normal sugar. It has to go through the liver first, and the liver will store it as glycogen as long as the liver's glycogen stores aren't full. So as long as we're not going crazy on the fructose, which is difficult to do if we're eating mostly natural foods. But let's say an apple has 10 grams of fructose, okay? To get the equivalent of an apple in like a glass of orange juice, you'd almost just have to take like a little sip. So a glass of orange juice, for example, may have up to 40 grams of fructose, depending on how big it is, but a decent sized glass of orange juice may have up to like 40 grams of fructose. So that's the equivalent of like 4 to 5 apples. And think of how difficult that is to eat on your own because of the fiber, and you'd get full very quickly. But in the juice, we can easily absorb and drink that high amount of fructose in just one sitting. So that's why I don't recommend juices. People think, oh, it's orange juice, it's good. They give it to their kids. I mean, that just because they're kids, that doesn't mean that they aren't at risk of possible health problems, or down the road, especially, if they're filling up their liver glycogen all the time. And any excess fructose then, if the liver glycogen is full, is going to get stored as fat. So it's really not a good idea to go crazy on the fructose. But again, if we're eating fruit itself, that's really hard to do. Like, when's the last time you ate 4 to 5 apples in one sitting, right? It's pretty difficult to do. But it's also wise, that's why it's wise to steer away from pops. Or I say pops because I'm from Colorado, but soda pops, because of the high fructose corn syrup. Sucrose is also not a good sugar. It's got fructose in it, so it's fructose plus glucose is sucrose. And again, it really depends on the amount, but most sucrose foods, just like juices and soda pops with fructose, most sucrose foods are going to be higher in sugar and higher in fructose itself, since sucrose is fructose plus glucose. So you're going to have fructose in any type of sucrose type food. Now, again, you don't need to worry about it if you're eating mostly natural foods, because these, high fructose corn syrup and high amounts of sucrose are generally almost always found in higher processed foods. It doesn't mean you can't enjoy those things once in a while. I'm a proponent of Michael Pollan's quote, treat treats as treats. So if you're using it as a treat, go ahead and do it. It becomes not a treat when it's a habit, and we do it all the time. Back to the original question, fruit on its own, not going to raise blood sugar nearly as much as like white bread or a processed carb. Still might as well eat some nuts or, some protein or fat with a piece of fruit, but you're probably not going to get, gain fat and get unhealthy by eating a piece of fruit naked on its own.